Ole Miss is chasing a top transfer portal defensive lineman, and you know what? That's not all. We have all the transfer portal gossip coming up next.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports. Today on the show, we talk about Ole Miss hitting the transfer portal for a couple of targets, starting with Chris Hardie from Jacksonville State. We talk about what type of player he is, what he would bring for the table. Does the Hardie recruiting mean that Ole Miss is walking away from Tyler Barron? Does that affect Ole Miss's ceiling? And Ole Miss is also working to get a visit from Star Thomas, a running back from the New Mexico State Aggies, on campus for a visit. He's the thumper that Ole Miss has been needing this window. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. The week of the 4th of July, July 2nd, we are planning on having a meet and greet somewhere in the I-20 corridor near Jackson, Mississippi. Think Madison or Flowood. The time and the location is still to be determined, but the date we've settled in on as July 2nd. So that should be pretty cool. And there's still time to join the Grove Collective and help out Ole Miss football and help them go to the top. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, interesting situation. Ole Miss is going through, and we'll have a visit on campus of Chris Hardie, the defensive lineman from Jacksonville State. This was actually broken by Pete Thamel the other day. He said Ole Miss is set to host transfer defensive lineman Chris Hardie this weekend per the AP Sports Agency. He was the first team All-CUSA for Jacksonville State this season. He's a 6'2", 270-pound defensive lineman from Vincent, Alabama. He went to Vincent High School. Good player. If you look at his stats, he had 61 total tackles a year ago, 16 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 4 quarterback hurries. A really good, productive G5 player from Jacksonville State. He's somebody that comes in. He's more of a Jared Ivey type defensive end as opposed to like a Princely Amon Mielen type defensive end. He is somebody that would allow Ole Miss to play 3 down if they needed to, essentially. You could put Chris Hardie on one side, Jared Ivey on the other, have a nose guard alternating of Walter Nolan or J.J. Pegues and kind of turn them loose if you needed to play an 8-man back more than a 3-man front. I say that for a reason. If you're going up against a team that is very pass happy to where drop 8 becomes an issue, you can do that, and he would allow that to happen. Chris Hardie is a quick twitch defensive lineman. Like I said, he's 6'2", 270. He's a one-and-done type player. We always talk about the last dance type stuff. Jackson Dart is following him, I do believe, on Instagram. We always pay attention to Jackson Dart's follows on Instagram because it can mean something very much. Now, again, Ole Miss is playing 4D chess right now in the transfer portal. They know they are playing with house money. They have the top 10 position at every offensive position group, so they're all taken care of. Defensive line is already a top 10 unit in the country. Even if you add Chris Hardie to it, it's only going to go up a little bit. He's somebody that is a like-for-like almost transfer of Isaac Ukwu a year ago. Came in from James Madison, was more than an adequate, solid player during his time in Oxford, Mississippi, and he has that upperclassman, that mindset, that paycheck year mindset that would help Ole Miss's defense along. Now, like I said, he is not a Princely Amon Mielen. This would not be somebody that is being brought in because of anything going on with Princely Amon Mielen. Honestly, we need to talk about this in the next segment, but is this kind of meaning that Ole Miss is walking away from Tyler Barron? We'll talk about that in the next segment. And we'll also talk about Star Thomas, the running back for New Mexico State. But Chris Hardie, he is a good defensive front player. Like I said, he is not a jack. You don't need to expect him to be a jack. You don't need to pretend that he's going to be a jack. But in that Jared Ivey type role, he is somebody that would fit in pretty fine there. Now, does this mean Kamarion Franklin in the spring maybe picked up on things a little bit slower than they hoped? Possibly. That is something that we need to consider. I thought going into the spring practice that Kamarion Franklin was the designated backup, essentially, for Jared Ivey. But if they bring in another like-for-like type player with Jared Ivey, you know that they're going to have competition on that side of the ball. But the defensive line as a whole is going to get a little bit better. Now, if you move over and look at the front four, and remember, the jack is basically a position. It's a combination outside linebacker, defensive end. That's what the jack position is. The other three players, it can have a 3-down system. You can have a 4-down system based on the ability of that jack linebacker to play both. Okay. So when you look over at Princely and Montmillan, and everybody's, freaking out over Princely, which they shouldn't. They absolutely shouldn't, because he practiced the whole spring and then had the work done afterwards. If it was something that desperately needed surgery and they knew that the turnaround was going to go into the season, he would have sat out during spring practice, because anybody that had any type of a bump that was inhibiting them sat out spring practice. So when you look at those jack positions, I don't think Chris Hardie is a guy that would play over as a jack. I think the backup candidates for jack behind Princely and Montmillan is like DJ Holmes, Suntaran Perkins, TJ Dudley. Those guys, I think, are going to be the leading for that position. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think Chris Hardie has a place on Ole Miss's defensive line should he transfer to Ole Miss. I think he absolutely does, and I think he makes the defensive line better. Being quick twitch, 6'2", 270, adds some versatility of a 3-man and a 4-man front. He's not just a Marcus Tillman. Like, Marcus Tillman was a really good defensive lineman when I was at Ole Miss back in 2005, 2006. I remember Coach O being absolutely over the moon that he won a recruiting battle with LSU for Marcus Tillman, being from South Mississippi. But Marcus Tillman, for all that he was a 4-3 strong side defensive end. That's what he was. There was not any versatility in his game necessarily. I think he was 255, 260 type pounds. Really, really good football player and really good for that role, but it doesn't require the variability of these modern defenses that, like, Pete Golding is running, that combines a 3-4 and a 4-3 defense. So the strong side defensive end turns into a 3-man defensive end, and a jack linebacker becomes an outside linebacker or defensive end, depending on what we're doing and what they want to accomplish. And you can do it in different personnel groups, and it allows you to 1-gap, or in some cases even 2-gap defenses, to allow yourself to be more varied and multiple on defense, to give different looks to the offensive line, the quarterback. All that makes playing quarterback and playing offense against this defense more difficult. I really went into the weeds on that, but the things you need to realize is in the Ole Miss defense, they can go from 4-3 to 3-4 on play to play. And they can do that stuff because they have some variability in their personnel, and all it is lining up. So it might look a little different from time to time. That's all you need to know about that. Chris Hardie would allow Ole Miss to be a little bit more varied than they were. Now, whenever you have a Jared Ivey, you can just have Chris Hardie, and all of a sudden you have a true 3-4 front, to where you have 2 5s, the whole 9 yards, a straight nose. But it's interesting to see what they're going to do with that jack position. That is becoming one of the questions of fall camp that I am going to have, especially if for some reason Princely and Mommy Ellen is a little bit slower recovering than I have been hearing. Like I heard that Zachary Franklin was going to be back for the Alabama game a year ago. I think everybody heard that. It didn't work out. He was never right. And he ended up transferring away from Ole Miss because he just never got right. He had a botched surgery. Everything was a little bit more difficult. He couldn't become what he was. All because the surgery that needed to be happening after the football season, all of a sudden it was 6 months after that when it actually happened. So when it comes to Princely and Mommy Ellen, you don't count any chickens. And whenever you look at what the defensive could be and how the personnel on this Ole Miss defense sits, somebody like Chris Hardie makes a lot of sense to feel that Isaac Ukwu type need for what they want to do. And that will allow Ole Miss to become even more variable on defense. I just did a whole lot of word salad there. Went into the weeds. If I apologize, if I got a little bit too deep, I apologize. But we will talk about that more once fall camp starts, because the defensive front at Ole Miss has a chance to be really interesting, really good. I'm not saying like they're tricky for the sake of being tricky. They're going to be good, but we have to see exactly how they're going to be used. I hope they have some open scrimmages coming to fall camp now that the transfer portal has closed down, honestly. Good stuff. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. Chris Hardie sure checks all the boxes, but does that mean that Ole Miss has moved on from Tyler Barron? We'll talk about that next. Game Time is the authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually goes down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of the customer service features that you are looking for. Game Time has, and they do that potentially better than anybody else. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, are you watching Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. All right, so with Ole Miss recruiting Chris Hardie, it leads to some interesting questions. And more specifically, we heard rumors going back to like March and February about Tyler Barron potentially coming back to Ole Miss. That was it was all on there. And Ole Miss had an in-home visit with Tyler Barron. Tyler Barron has gone to Miami and USC. And that's the thing that everybody needs to realize with Tyler Barron. Miami and USC are desperate need for defensive linemen, like realistic desperate need. And in the second transfer portal window, players have teams over a barrel, generally in the transfer portal. If you come across and look desperate for a player, they will get everything they can, and they should. Tyler Barron transferred from Tennessee. He committed to Ole Miss, signed the paperwork to Ole Miss, by the way. So keep that in mind. And then went to Louisville, stayed there for a couple of months, and entered the transfer portal again, and has taken official visits to Miami and USC. Like I said, they're in pretty desperate need of a defensive lineman at the moment. And I think he's probably going to end up at one of those places. LSU has kicked the tires on this player. Ole Miss probably won't release him to LSU because since he signed the paperwork, you can't do SEC to SEC from the winter transfer portal window until the spring transfer portal window. Whether or not he went to school there, he signed the paperwork. So I expect him to end up probably at Miami. Miami is in pretty desperate need, and they need to win right now. And because of that, I do think Ole Miss is moving on a little bit, and Chris Hardie is an example of moving on in Oxford. He checks all the boxes. The only thing that he does not have, and the one thing that you should probably potentially be concerned about, is he's a G5 guy. It's a situation similar to what they had a year ago with Isaac Ukwu. Chris Hardie's a really, really good football player, an all-conference USA level player for Jacksonville State and the Gamecocks. And he has a chance to be a really good player, but it also depends on, you don't want him to play 40 snaps a game. You want him to come in and give you 20 good snaps per game. And if Chris Hardie can do that, Ole Miss's defense is going to be really good. I think Ole Miss's defense would go down a little bit if he was asked to play 60 plays at a game or something like that. Like I've told you many times, we're in an age of a starting 22 at this point. It's not a starting 11 on defense the way it was. With the advent of tempo and all of the things that they can do offensively, you need many more players to come in and perform at a very high level. So it's a starting 22. So somebody like Chris Hardie would fill a role. We talk about Ole Miss filling roles, not holes in this transfer portal window. And this is just another example of that. Now, Khalil Jacobs, who visited Ole Miss this past week, he rescheduled visits to Missouri and Alabama like he said he was going to. I think he's in Missouri Friday and he's at Alabama Saturday. We might have some closure perhaps as soon as the end of the weekend on that. So by the next time we do a show, we might know where Ole Miss sits, or the little bit of clarity has been brought on that situation. This transfer portal, it's crazy. It doesn't close. You can will the offseason as much as you want to will the offseason, but that just means you're ignoring things that are actually relevant. And I think that this transfer portal period going through June is going to be very important. And then in July, you have SEC Media Days. It is a year-round calendar right now. A year-round calendar right now. Now, an interesting thing, thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. We've been talking about it for weeks, but we are finally seeing potentially that thumper running back that we've all been waiting for. It's winner take all time on the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. You can also get the Rebs and the over in their over-under of 9+ wins this season. If that is your flavor or choice, you can get them to win the SEC. There's national championship odds. There's Jackson Dart Heisman odds. All of these are available in the FanDuel app right now. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So that's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And with FanDuel.com/lockedon, you can make every playoff shot count by visiting that site. FanDuel, it's America's #1 sports book. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Be part of history. Now, I don't know, probably about a month ago, I started talking about another running back name that I was hearing. So if you've listened to this show with any consistent period of time, you've heard me talk about a running back that was a thumper that is Ole Miss is looking at, and I just couldn't release the name. Well, that running back that I was talking about 3 weeks ago was Star Thomas. And he is in the final stages of setting up a visit at Ole Miss. He needs his transcripts to get to Oxford before a visit is set up. If for some reason Star Thomas can't get into Ole Miss, if the eligibility is a problem, he will not be coming on a visit. But if everything is good to go, I look for Star Thomas to potentially end up in Oxford. Like I said, I've heard this name for 3 or 4 weeks at this point. He is a 6 foot, 225-pound running back. Last year, he had 112 carries, 653 yards. That's a little bit over 5 yards a carry, maybe 6 yards a carry, something like that. 4 touchdowns. He also had 22 catches, about 200 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns as well. Whenever you look at his big games over the course of the season, he ran for 96 yards and 2 touchdowns against Western Illinois. He rushed for 54 against New Mexico, 88 against La Tech, 85 against Western Kentucky, 67 yards against Auburn. He also had a catch for a 17-yard touchdown. This is a guy that ran for 112 times, 653 yards, and 4 touchdowns a year ago. He even had some kick returns that he used as well during this thing. 6 foot, 225 pounds, out of Homer, Louisiana. He went to Coffeyville Community College. Now, why is that important? Well, Coffeyville Community College, he's a junior college guy, and he ended up going to New Mexico State, and he performed well there. But if he's from Homer, Louisiana, Ole Miss signed a player this class from Homer, Louisiana. That's a little small town in northwest Arkansas, not Homer, like Homer Simpson. He is from there. He's a good player. He's a bowling ball. He's hard for you to get a good shot on defensively because he is, I don't know, in low center of gravity, round mound of rebound, the whole 9 yards. It's kind of funny after what he did to Auburn as well. But he is a good little running back. Now, if you look at what Ole Miss has currently at running back, okay? And this is important because Star Thomas would not be coming in to fill a hole. He would totally be coming in to fill a role. And this thing starts with Ulysses Bentley IV, okay? 95 carries a year ago, 540 yards, 4 touchdowns. Let's just go off the number of carries that he had a year ago. 95, okay? We'll just stick right there. Another back is Henry Parrish Jr., 100 carries, 625 yards, 6 touchdowns. That is 195 carries. Okay. Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, who is from New Mexico. He is in Lobo, 189 carries, 1,190 yards, 17 touchdowns. Okay. That gets you to about 360 carries. Okay. Somewhere in that ballpark, 360 carries, about 2,400 yards at this point. And then you add Star Thomas to the mix. 112 carries, 650 yards. That would give you in the ballpark of about 460 carries from a year ago, about 3,000 yards, and somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 touchdowns is what you have in the running back room right now. Before Star Thomas, if he chose to commit to Ole Miss had a top 10 running back room in the entire country. This running back room will have been reconstructed from the running back room that it's been pretty good over the last couple of years. Ole Miss was 3rd in the nation in running the football in 2022. Not quite at that same level in 2023, but it's been built and torn down and built into the image of the 2021 and 2020 running back rooms. Whenever Snoop Connor and Jerry and Ely and Henry Parrish were doing their thing offensively. You look at this, and Ulysses Bentley is the plus Jerry and Ely. I compare him to a Jerry and Ely type running back. That's what he is. Henry Parrish. So it becomes, what is Snoop Connor? You have Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, who is a good running back. He is a legit good running back. Look at those numbers. He averaged probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 yards a carry, 17 touchdowns, and all of that. But he is not technically all of the things that Snoop Connor was. Not technically. You add somebody like Star Thomas, and all of a sudden you get there. You get that that bowling ball type running back that you can put in the fourth quarter, and he's just somebody you don't want to tackle. Or maybe you put him in the second or third quarter and just let Ulysses Bentley, the fourth, have the fourth quarter. Ole Miss is in a really good spot in the running back. And if they get Star Thomas, this running back room has already gone from good to good. Star Thomas means that this running back room has every type of player that you can think of. Well, I like to use the phrase good to great. This running back room would go there. And this would be a situation when you look at Jackson Dart a year ago. Okay, when you look at his numbers, 233 completions, 358 yards, 3,364 yards passing, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. We talk about the wide receivers that's at his disposal, and Trey Harris, who might be the best wide receiver in the entire country. Whenever you have Juice Wells, who last year was in contention to be the best wide receiver in the Southeastern Conference before he got injured. And you have the best tight end potentially in the country in Caden Prescorn. This is going to be an explosive offense. It is. It's going to be explosive. And they've built the running back room and the wide receiver room and the tight end room as a room that is capable of playing 16 football games. Remember that. 16 football games. That's the goal. Getting to the national championship, winning the SEC title, playing 3 or 4 playoff games and getting there, get on those maximum amount of games, 16 playoff games. That is the goal for Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss Rebel team. So that's why you add a Star Thomas, another running back room, because an injury takes you down to where all of a sudden that could get tricky. In the wide receiver room, everybody's like, well, why do you have Marquise Willis and why do you have Deion Smith? It's 16 games. The quarterback room being stacked up, the offensive line being able to go 10 deep, 16 games. So don't question the depth, because we've never played a season at the level of which they could have to play a season this year. Really interesting stuff. It's going to be imperative for Jackson Dart to get on the ground, to slide. It's going to be imperative to utilize and rotate the running backs. You might not have a single one of the 4 that has 1,200 yards rushing like Quinshon Judkins did over the last couple of years, but you might have 3 over 700 yards. Them rotating through them will be a mighty big deal. We've learned a lot this week. We learned about Chris Hardie visiting Ole Miss and how he might be a replacement if Ole Miss is walking away from Tyler Barron. We learned about Star Thomas and what type of player he is and how he would fit in this room and why Ole Miss is even recruiting an extra running back to begin with. Ole Miss is in the concept of adding players at all times. Now that there is no subtraction, you can build your roster. You can look at it. It's like, where do we need to improve? What is going on? And knowing that and knowing what this Ole Miss football team can be, it is pretty impressive indeed. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen, and we have the most perspective surrounding Ole Miss sports, and it is one of the many reasons why we are the number one Ole Miss podcast, and thank you for that. This week's top 5 topic is the top Egg Bowl moments. My show aired last night. We have a couple more that's going to air over the weekend, but for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. They've launched their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. And for those of you on YouTube, we're going to send you there right now. Hotty toddy, everyone. Have a good weekend.